So at the Katie Phang News Channel, we always want to bring you newsmakers and lawmakers and frankly, people that are just inspirational because what they're doing is staying in the fight, bringing the energy and making sure that they keep their finger on the pulse of everything that all of us across the United States are focusing on. And right now I have the privilege of spending time with Mallory McMorrow from the great state of Michigan. Before we hit record, I actually was just telling her how much of a fan I am of Michigan, especially Northern Michigan. Mallory, I got to tell you, you guys are spoiled because not only do Michiganders get you, but they also get some pretty kick-ass local and state politicians.
Oh, that is right. We are no shortage of spoils here in Michigan. I'm very grateful and lucky, and that's why I fight so hard for this state.
Well, Mallory, that does then lead me to my next question, which is it was always so inspirational to talk to you about why you care. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, but your journey into politics was not one that was plotted out over decades. It literally was after Donald Trump won 2016, the day after you Googled how to run for office, which I think a lot of us have probably flirted with Googling, but maybe didn't actually hit enter in that search engine. Why take the battle to an official place like running for office back in 2016, and why stay in the fight?
It was just one of those moments. I had a very different career. I was a car designer. I worked in media and advertising. At the time in 2016, I was running a consultancy, doing some product planning in the auto industry and branding for local small businesses. And there was a video that went viral right after the 2016 election of middle school students chanting "Build that wall" at one
Mm.
of their classmates. And that was Royal Oak Middle School, which was my polling place the day before. And for a state like Michigan, which is so heavily tied to the auto industry, you could see that there was something compelling about the idea that we could make America great again. But so many people were willing to throw away decency and kindness. This is a man who openly bragged about sexual assault and clearly made it okay to demonize and target somebody who might look or sound different in a way that really broke my heart. I think because it was kids who were doing this, that really pushed me to go online, found an organization called She Should Run. I downloaded a guide. I joined Emerge, which recruits and trains Democratic women to run for office. And of my cohort, not everybody has run. Some people have become social workers or organizers or campaign managers, but every woman found their way into making change in our state. And I think it's really powerful.
And we talked about this prior to the November 2024 election, you and I, and we've had the luxury of spending time to speak online and offline about what's going on. But I think it's an understatement to say, Mallory, that the people that really have stepped up across the board in every way that counts have been women. I'd like to think it's because women are usually marginalized. We're put on the borders. We're usually undervalued. We're underpaid, and we're actually given most of the work to be able to tackle. And this is not to malign any of our male allies and our male advocates, but I do find that that is what's been happening, that it's been the women, and especially women of color, but all women that have said, we're fed up about the way that this country is heading.
I do think that's right. And I don't think it's a mistake that very often the responsibilities of caretaking fall on the backs of women, whether it's our kids or our parents. And when I look at who is really stepping up to lead here, our country needs caretaking. We need to bring our communities together. We need to bring people together. And thinking about this, I can't even call it the one big beautiful bill that maybe by the time this is out will have passed, unfortunately. There's no caretaking behind that. It's cruelty. It is going to kick millions of people off of health insurance. And I do believe that this country needs more caretakers in positions of power. And that, to me, has been the silver lining of women stepping up and leading and organizing and bringing people together and showing we can do something very different in our state and in our country. And it may be the only way out of this mess that Donald Trump has unleashed on us.
So, Mallory, how do we reconcile then what I believe that you said is true, that there is a caretaking component that is necessary to guide this country into a better place, to show that there is a universal path of care and love, that we can all be taking care of each other, that we're respectful of everybody's individual choices to be able to raise their family, their children, and to care for them a certain way. How do we reconcile that, though, with the power of the manosphere, which I'll put in quotes because I'm not quite sure if it's actually real, but this idea that so many people voted, for somebody like Donald Trump, that there's been a celebration of this toxic masculinity, this kind of, strong man energy that is evidenced in, Trump's love for Putin and even Nayib Bukele and Viktor Orban. Like, he wants to emulate those people. And I think a lot of Americans, especially American men, voted for that kind of energy. So how do we kind of still speak to them and tell them, look, we can give you strong leadership. It just doesn't have to be in a fascist form like Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's right. And to be very clear, caring for other people doesn't mean you're weak and doesn't mean you
Exactly.
can't also be strong. And Scott Galloway, as somebody that I've listened to a lot, really talk about this and taking stock in the fact that maybe over my lifetime, where I've grown up with kind of the change of Barbie, for example, who is now more aspirational and she has careers and her body
Yes.
shape is different and she comes in different races, and that's wonderful. My daughter is 4 now. She loves princess movies, but princess movies now, they're heroes, they're heroines. They don't need help. You think about Frozen and Moana and Brave, and that's all wonderful. But maybe it has been at the expense of some healthier male role models where, because there's a vacuum, that I do believe there are a lot of young men, and we saw this in Michigan at places like Michigan State, where on election day of 2024, I talked to volunteers who said they saw college kids, men, come in MAGA hats and clearly vote for Donald Trump and nothing else. And for somebody like me, I think about how do we speak to people in a way that we don't have to mimic what Trump does. We don't have to mimic toxicity, but we can show that we can be strong. And one of the pillars of my campaign is we have to take back the idea of success. It's not enough for Democratic messaging to say things like, Democrats are fighting for you to put food on the table, which is not untrue, but it's also the bare minimum. And it misses what is aspirational. I grew up on MTV Cribs. You want to believe that if you work hard enough, you can get that mansion and the toys and the cars. Like, you don't
Yeah.
have to be an asshole about it, but you should be successful. So I think that is going to be a pillar of our campaign. And it's also just in how I show up in places. We're doing a brewery tour right now. We are doing as many podcasts or interviews or shows as possible, realizing that I would say for an overwhelming majority of people, people don't think about politics all day, every day, and that politics is downstream of culture and their lives. So we got to go everywhere and talk to everybody, even if I'm showing up in a place and not even talking about my race or policies, but people just getting to know me. And I think that's how we bring men back into this without giving up this idea that we need caretaking and that it is actually a strength to look out for other people.
I want to talk about that brewery tour in a second, but I did want to stick on something that you just said, which was we have to kind of take back the idea about how even success is being defined, right? Because I agree. I think that anybody's going to define success in different ways depending upon who they are. But it kind of speaks to a larger kind of conversation I've been having with several people, which is how do we take back certain symbols too that I think have been hijacked by the right? Patriotism, even as a term, has been hijacked by the right. Just even the American flag, right? So even colors now. Like I will say that I don't want to use the word triggered, but when I see a red hat,
Mm-hmm.
I stop. Right? Literally, I'll stop for a second until that person turns and I can see the front of their red hat.
Right.
There's certain things that I think we've either allowed as Democrats to be taken away from us, or we haven't figured out the way of taking them back in a way that has universal appeal. And I'm not saying that we have to cater to the far right at all. I'm just saying, how do we kind of take these things back, Mallory? Because you speak in common sense parlance. You speak in a way that anybody could understand and wouldn't feel like they're being put upon by the way that you're speaking. And yet I feel like the MAGA movement has taken these symbols and kind of made them their own, and has led this false narrative that we don't believe in patriotism and we don't believe in being Americans.
I think that's right. And I do think that it is harder on the Democratic side because we are a big tent party, because we celebrate diversity. But my background is in design. I was a senior designer for Hot Wheels. I think about branding and visuals and how you show up and what it looks like. And what was really stark in a positive way for me was I was out at the No Kings protests, one of the many, many, many around the country, but one of them here in Michigan, and to see how many American flags were out. And it wasn't at the expense of any other flags or any symbols or any colors, but I think recognizing the American flag means we are united and we are diverse within that unity. Our founder said that we are striving towards a more perfect union, acknowledging upfront that it is not perfect. We are a work in progress and we always will be. And I think getting comfortable in the fact that we can still be a big tent, very diverse party and celebrate diverse voices and symbols and backgrounds, but still unite around common symbols and take it back in a way that recognizes, there are as many stars and stripes on that flag as there are because it represents all of the states and all of the territories, and that it's bringing that together, which I think is something that has been maybe a little bit uncomfortable for Democrats. On the Republican side, particularly under Trump, it's much easier because they are promoting, white nationalism. It's a very authoritarian idea where men are in charge and everybody falls under them. So you can pick one symbol and you can run with it based on who the man in charge is. And we can say, no, we're going to own the same symbols. We're going to own our flag. It's our country, but it means diversity and inclusion to us. We can define it in our own way.
So just kind of spinning off what you just said, then what's the missing branding then for the Democrats right now? Because I feel like there is some elusive thing there where it doesn't have to just be one thing, but do you have any suggestions on how the Democrats writ large can just say, this is our brand, this is what we are?
Yeah, we have been running on my campaign, and I do believe that the solution for Democrats out of the wilderness is not going to come from the DNC. It's not going to come from some centralized location,
Amen.
but it may
Amen.
come from a Senate race that may be one of the most watched Senate races in the country in a battleground state like Michigan,
Yep.
where we can write the playbook. So
Yep.
what we are out and campaigning on is this idea that we stand for a new American dream, which is intentional and a direct contrast to Make America Great Again, acknowledging that we can't find success in our past. And I think that's what we missed, because in a state like ours in the 1980s, 5 of the top 10 metro regions in the entire country for median household income were in Michigan. So people remember we were the wealthiest state in the entire country. People were doing well, no matter what corner of the state you lived in. And that's why I think people really bought into this idea of Make America Great Again. But this idea of a new American dream acknowledges that we have to build something new, that we have to build it in the rubble that Donald Trump is going to leave behind as he's slashing and burning through government and institutions. And that is both scary and an opportunity, because we also have to acknowledge that for way too many people, this is not just about going back to the status quo, because for too many people, the status quo wasn't working.
Didn't work. Yeah.
Housing affordability is not new. The decline in the birth rate is not new. And when I talk to a lot of people, particularly around my age, they would say, I would love to start a family. I can't afford it. I had one of my neighbors down the street from me said she applied to 26 different childcare centers for her 2 boys with non-refundable deposits for all of them. So she was out hundreds of dollars just to apply, couldn't get into any of them, and eventually just quit and left the workforce. So that is something that, we're testing. We're out there. We're at events right now to see if this resonates with people. And it is. So far, people are really attracted to this idea that we have to make something new, and that for too many people, the American dream is just a dream. It's not accessible. Can we own that and do it under the flag, under the symbols of this country, in a way that is not this very dark dystopian nightmare that Trump is laying out?
So we've seen what I call Trump's big bullshit bill get through the United States Senate by the skin of its teeth. It took Vice President J.D. Vance to get it across the finish line, at least for the U.S. Senate. And it's the ultimate iteration of it is so incredibly destructive, the largest transfer of wealth from the poor to the ultra-rich in the United States history. You are running for the United States Senate. You have done exceptional work on the state level in the state of Michigan. It does sometimes boil down to just a numbers game when you get to something like the Senate, even now with our House of Representatives. Talk about when you've been on this on-tap brewery tour you've been doing, which I think is it just makes so much sense, Mallory, because we have to listen to everybody. It doesn't mean that we have to agree with everybody, but we have to listen to everybody. When I was just in your state a few weeks ago with my family, there was a lot of rural Michigan. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of Trump flags. There was a lot of Make America Great going on, especially in parts of rural Michigan. They were juxtaposed against cities that whose names, even if you've never been in Michigan, you would recognize the names: Pontiac,
Right.
Flint. They were juxtaposed against those cities that are still trying to pick themselves up out of economic despair. And I just feel like there's just got to be so much going on that people want to fix to pursue that new American dream. What are you hearing on this on tap, brewery tour? Because I know you've gone into areas that are very red.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of did our trial run last weekend. This was an idea that we kicked around, realizing in a state like Michigan, people are burned out on politics. This is a place where, because we're a battleground, voters get relentlessly targeted with polls and phone calls and people knocking at their door. Everybody parachutes in every election cycle
Yeah.
endlessly. It's 14 months before the primary, 17 months before the general election in this race. There's going to be plenty of time for town halls and talking about policy, but this early, we wanted to really lower the bar to entry and just say, come grab a beer with me and let's get to know each other. And I thought maybe a couple of tables of people would show up and it would be me sitting around, a table of people and having a conversation. We did 4 breweries in 4 counties over 24 hours. We were in Ferndale, Flint, Warren, and Ypsilanti. And we probably had close to 600 or 700 people come out
Wow.
to all of those stops. So
Wow.
we really had to pivot. We changed up sort of the formatting. We did more open Q&A. But what I loved about it was I saw people who I would never see at a Democratic club or a town hall. And going back to visuals, if you think of a town hall, it's people sitting in rows of chairs waiting for the speaker.
Yeah, to come out, on the patio, on the podium or the
Yeah, but
dais.
at
Yeah.
this, people were coming in and sitting around tables and getting to know each other. And yes, they wanted to hear from me, but they were connecting with each other about why they came, and people brought their families. And a woman who started a dog sitting business who I had gotten to know, she came out. She's never been to a political event before, and she brought a friend. And what I heard from people is just fear. There's this sense that came out no matter where we were, that for the last really 10 years, people feel like I'm walking on eggshells. And to your point about the dichotomy between somewhere like Flint and a more rural area, a lot of the issues are the same. You think about what's going to come down from this big bullshit bill, it is going to devastate Medicare, Medicaid. But even if you're not on Medicaid, and I don't think most people realize this, it's going to close rural hospitals. It is going to close nursing homes. It is going to close birthing centers. And that is going to devastate everybody. And those issues are the same. But that's what I heard at some of these brewery tours, which is we all need the same thing. And what Donald Trump has done, and it's so infuriating, is weaponize us against each other. So that you do have, Flint and Ferndale at odds with rural Michigan when everybody needs hospitals, everybody needs good schools, everybody needs healthcare. And it has become this battle for scarcity when we're the wealthiest country in the world. We should not be fighting against each other for our basic needs. We should get back to a place where we can come together. And that's what I heard loud and clear is just, I am tired of walking on eggshells and I want to be able to talk to my neighbors. How do we do that? And I think part of it sounds kind of trite, but just invite people out for a beer and get to know each other and stop lecturing people.
So, Mallory, a couple of things to follow up on that. Just this seems to me, though, there's 2 barriers to entry to that, though. One is you just said a lot of people don't know how they're going to be impacted by this big bullshit bill. And sometimes sometimes there's now this baked in, because of the division that's been created a la Trump and the right and Republicans, we don't trust the messenger. So, for example, I could bring in the top economist from the top university in the world, and I'll just say it's Harvard. I could bring in a Harvard economist who could sit down and, in the most layperson of terms, explain why we are all going to be financially devastated across the board unless we're one of 83 billionaires in the United States by this bill. One, because it's coming from me, there's going to be mistrust. I'm going to be blamed as being fake news. 2, because this professor comes from Harvard, there's some liberal bicoastal elite kind of person who, doesn't know what the hell they're talking about, and it's also fake news, right? How do you tackle that, Mallory? Because you do have a D in front of your name. You are a Democrat. And even though you're incredibly well known and respected on the state level, you are crisscrossing the state of Michigan because you're running for United States Senate. How do you deal with those two barriers to entry to have these conversations with people so they actually really hear what the truth is?
So you're going to see this play out on our campaign. And when I brought my team together, the way that I shared how I want this campaign to feel is that I am the messenger. I'm not the main character. And what I mean by that is when we go into these communities, you're going to start to see that we uplift those voices. And maybe I'm interviewing some people. Maybe it's just bringing us together. But in our social media and our communication, sometimes I am the right messenger. A lot of times I'm not. And it may not be bringing in an economist, but maybe it is the nurse who delivered your baby at that nursing center or at that birthing center in that hospital that's going to close.
Yeah.
People are much more likely to trust people they know in their own lives. And that's really hard to do. That means we have to go out and find people, but that is part of the reason that we started this campaign so early. And people are like, how the heck are you going to run a campaign for a year and a half, 2 years? But we have to go into these communities, build relationships, find people, and then find the people whose voices we want to uplift. I want this campaign to feel like a love letter to Michigan. I want people to feel like they've gotten to know the state more through the campaign than they already do. And that was one of the highest compliments I got in my very first campaign was somebody who said, I've lived in Michigan my entire life. I've lived in Troy, one of the cities that I was running to represent. They said, I am prouder of Troy than I've ever been because of how you campaign, because you share stories. That really matters. And I think finding trusted voices that are already in people's lives. There is so much distrust from any outsider, whether it's a politician, an economist, an expert. It doesn't have to feel elite and academic. You can find the person who is directly impacted, who can talk to you like you're a neighbor in a way that you are much more likely to trust than some quote unquote outsider who's going to tell you why you're going to be affected. Talk with people, not at them.
And I want people to understand that are watching this right now and that will be watching this later. You're not only running for the United States Senate to represent the great state of Michigan, but you're still serving as a state senator for the great state of Michigan. And so you are doing more than double time in terms of
Yeah.
the work. Talk about how critical it is to have somebody like you who does know Michiganders so well, having represented them as a state senator, being somebody who's raising a family in that state, why you are obviously the better pick than somebody like Mike Rogers, who just wants to do more of what President Trump's agenda is. Mike Rogers has just openly declared and embraced the Trump kind of mentality. He said that that's what he wants to go to the Washington, D.C. to do. He falsely claims there's a mandate that was delivered, which there was not. So for people that are in Michigan, and abroad, but especially people in Michigan, how critical it is for somebody like you who just knows the people so well to be able to continue that representation in Washington, D.C.
I mean, look, I will be the first to admit we are the underdog in this race. And I came in knowing that there is this idea that, a state senator is not quote unquote experienced enough to be a United States senator.
Oh.
And I counter that and say, this is the state that sent Carl Levin to the United States Senate from the Detroit City Council. That was the move. And I think he became, such an icon and a pillar of public service because of that connection to his community, that he knew what it was like on the local level. He knew how municipal governance worked and how local budgets worked and the intricacies of how things play out on the local level. I'm sitting right now, I'm a member of the State Senate Appropriations Committee. 42% of our state budget is federal dollars. And I had one of my Republican colleagues in the Appropriations Committee raise his hand in a meeting recently and say, is this finally the year that we cut off our addiction to federal funds? And I made the point to say on record, those are our tax dollars. This idea that somehow it's like magic money that's a handout or it's welfare is completely wrong. They're our tax dollars that we send to Washington that we get back to fund Medicare, Medicaid, school, roads. We can't function without a strong relationship with the federal government. And Mike Rogers is somebody, when he was in Congress here in Michigan, he had a pretty decent reputation of, he was a conservative Republican, but he was good to work with. He listened to people. Then he moved to Florida and decided he was going to move back to Michigan just to run for Senate, and did so by going full Trump. He has since brought on Chris LaCivita this cycle, so he's going even Trumpier than he went last time.
Yeah.
And it's just going to be a red stamp on everything Trump wants to do, regardless of the impact on Michigan. And it says a lot that he just moved back to run and it's for himself. And he's not raising a family here anymore. And he's not, connected to the community in ways that maybe he was. I want to acknowledge maybe he was years ago when he was in Congress. He's not anymore. And we need somebody who's living it every day, who's connected with their neighbors, and who also knows how the state operates in tandem with the federal level. I want to be a real partner between the US Senate and the state Senate and the state House, because that is where so much of policy is made. And we can actually show the state and frankly the rest of the country what it looks like for government to work and to work together.
Well, listen, the new American dream is something that all of us can co-sign, regardless of political affiliation. And I think all of us across the United States would benefit from having somebody like you who can truly be a bridge between the state and the way that the state can function in conjunction with the federal government. I think there's been this divide and this kind of total misconception that they live in two separate spheres, when the reality is the federal and the state, they're just inextricably intertwined in the way that they operate to be able to benefit all Americans, but especially Michiganders. So, State Senator Mallory McMorrow from the great state of Michigan, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me and to let us know more about your race. And before we say goodbye, let people know, how can they support you while you're doing this race?
Thank you so much. Yeah, people can find out more at McMorrowforMichigan.com. I'm at Mallory McMorrow on all of the social media platforms. We are looking for donations, volunteer signups, or learn when our next brewery tour stop is. And we hope to see you out there.
Thanks again. Katie Phang here. The truth matters now more than ever. So hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. Thanks for watching.